What kind of person calls the cops on a stranger's cabin in the middle of nowhere, claiming it's an eyesore, only to watch their own family member get hauled away in handcuffs? That's the question that burned in my mind as I stood on my porch, staring down Karen Hensley, the self-proclaimed queen of the Pinewood Homeowners Association. My cabin, a weathered but sturdy retreat tucked deep in the Oregon woods, was my sanctuary, a place to escape the grind of city life. I'd spent years fixing it up, hammering every nail with my own hands, planting wildflowers around the clearing to make it my own. But to Karen, it was a blight on her perfect vision of the neighborhood, a collection of million-dollar vacation homes she patrolled like a hawk. She stood there, all 300 pounds of her, hands on hips, her shrill voice slicing through the evening air like a chainsaw. "This shack is a disgrace," she barked, pointing at my cabin as if it had personally insulted her. "I've already called the sheriff. You'll be out of here by morning." I leaned against the doorframe, my heart pounding but my face calm, wondering how a weekend retreat had turned into a battlefield. I'd only been at the cabin a few hours, unloading groceries from my truck, when Karen's SUV roared up the dirt road. She'd stormed out, her floral dress flapping like a warning flag, and started ranting about property codes I'd never heard of. Apparently, my cabin's peeling paint and unkempt garden violated some HOA rulebook I wasn't even subject to. Me land wasn't part of their gated enclave. I tried reasoning with her, explaining I'd inherited the place from my grandfather, that it was private property. But Karen wasn't here for logic. Her eyes gleamed with the kind of righteous fury that thrives on control. "You think you can just ignore the rules?" she snapped, pulling out her phone to dial 911. I could hear her exaggerated report. "There's a squatter in a rundown shack, probably cooking drugs or something." My stomach twisted. Drugs? I'm a high school teacher who spends weekends reading Thoreau and splitting firewood. But Karen's voice had a way of making lies sound like gospel. As the sun dipped below the pines, casting long shadows across the clearing, two sheriff's deputies pulled up, their cruiser's lights flashing red and blue against the trees. Karen's smirk widened, like she'd already won. I stepped forward, ready to explain. But before I could, a man stumbled out from behind Karen's SUV, his face pale and his hands jittery. It was her cousin, Mitch, a wiry guy in his 40s who looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Karen, tell him it's nothing," he hissed, his voice desperate. Karen shot him a look that could have curdled milk. "Stay out of this, Mitch," she snapped. But the deputies weren't focused on me anymore. One of them, a tall woman with a no-nonsense stare, was watching Mitch like a hawk. "Sir, step over here," she said, her hand resting on her belt. Mitch froze, his eyes darting to a duffel bag in the back of Karen's SUV. My gut told me something was wrong, really wrong. The air grew thicker as the deputies approached Mitch. Karen's confidence started to crack, her voice pitching higher. "This isn't about him. It's about this eyesore." She gestured wildly at my cabin. But the deputies weren't listening. The second officer, a burly man with a graying mustache, shone his flashlight into the SUV's open trunk. "What's in the bag, sir?" he asked Mitch, who was now sweating bullets. Mitch stammered. "It's just camping gear, you know." But his voice shook, and Karen's face went from red to ghostly white. I stood there, arms crossed, my own anger fading into confusion. What was going on? The female deputy opened the duffel bag, and her expression hardened. "Mitch Hensley, you're under arrest," she said, pulling out what looked like plastic bags filled with white powder. My jaw dropped. Karen's cousin. Drugs. This wasn't the HOA showdown I'd expected. Karen's screech could have shattered glass. No. You've got it all wrong. He's nuts just visiting. She lunged toward the deputy, who calmly stepped in front of her. Ma'am. Back off. The officer warned. Mitch, now in handcuffs, was babbling. Karen, you said it'd be fine. You said no one would check. Karen's eyes widened, and for the first time, she looked genuinely scared. I realized then that this wasn't just about my cabin. Karen hadn't just called the cops to bully dragged Mitch into her crusade, and he was carrying something he shouldn't have been. The twist hit me like a freight train. Karen's obsession with control had backfired, exposing her own family secrets. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The deputies led Mitch to the cruiser, his head hanging low. Karen was still yelling, her voice a mix of rage and panic. But the officers ignored her, focused on securing the evidence. I stood on my porch, the weight of the moment sinking in. This wasn't just about a nosy neighbor anymore. Karen had come here to assert her dominance, to prove she could bend the world to her will. But instead, she'd unraveled her own life. The female deputy turned to me, her expression softening. You the homeowner? She asked. I nodded, still processing. Looks like you're not the problem here, she said, glancing at Karen, who was now pacing like a caged animal. We'll need a statement, but you're free to go back inside. I thanked her, my voice steady despite the adrenaline. As the cruiser pulled away with Mitch in the back, Karen stood alone in the clearing, her empire of complaints crumbling around her. The night air grew colder, and I watched Karen from my porch, her silhouette shrinking as the cruiser's taillights vanished down the dirt road. She wasn't yelling anymore. Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, I saw something human in her flicker of regret. Maybe. Or fear. But then she turned, her eyes locking onto mine, and the venom was back. This is your fault, she spat, pointing a trembling finger at me. If you just fixed this dump, none of this would have happened. I could have laughed at the absurdity, but I didn't. Instead, I stepped forward, my voice low but firm. Karen, you called the cops. You brought them here. Whatever Mitch was into, that's on you. Her face twisted, like she wanted to scream, but no words came. For the first time, Karen Hensley was speechless. I thought that was the end of it, but Karen wasn't done. The next morning, she was back, this time with a clipboard and a man in a suit who introduced himself as her lawyer. They stood at the edge of my property, citing violations, threatening lawsuits, claiming my cabin was devaluing the entire neighborhood. I listened, my patience fraying, as the lawyer droned on about community standards. But I'd done my homework. I pulled out my deed, my grandfather's handwritten will, and a letter from the county confirming my land was outside the HOA's jurisdiction. You've got no claim here, I said, handing the papers to the lawyer. His face fell as he read them, and Karen's mouth opened, then closed, like a fish gasping for air. The lawyer muttered something about reviewing the documents and dragged Karen away, her protests fading into the trees. The real confrontation came a week later at a town hall meeting. Karen had rallied her HOA allies, a group of polished homeowners who looked at me like I was a stray dog. The meeting was held in a community center, all polished wood and flickering fluorescent lights. Karen stood at the podium, her voice dripping with righteous indignation. painting me as a reckless outsider who'd brought trouble to their pristine community. She didn't mention Mitch or the drugs. Of course, just my unsightly cabin and my refusal to bow to her rules. I sat in the back, my hands clenched, until it was my turn to speak. I stood, my heart racing but my voice steady, and told the truth, how Karen had harassed me, how she'd called the cops with lies, how her own cousin had been arrested because of her actions. The room went silent. Faces turned to Karen, who was gripping her chair, her face a mask of fury and shame. Then came the twist that no one saw coming, not even me. An older woman, Mrs. Delaney, stood up, her frail hands trembling. She lived in the HOA's enclave and had known Karen for years. "I've had enough," she said, her voice quavering but clear. "Karen's been bullying everyone, not just him." She pointed at me, then turned to the crowd. "She fined me for my rose bushes, threatened to sue my son for parking his truck too long. She's not protecting our community, she's tearing it apart." One by one, others spoke up. A young couple who'd been harassed over their kids' toys. A retiree fined for a birdhouse. Karen's empire wasn't just crumbling, it was imploding. The room erupted in murmurs, then arguments, as her allies scrambled to distance themselves. Karen stood frozen, her clipboard clattering to the floor. By the end of the meeting, the HOA board voted to remove Karen as president. She walked out without a word, her head bowed, the weight of her own actions crushing her. I didn't feel triumph, just relief. Back at my cabin that night, I sat on the porch, the stars bright above the pines. I thought about my grandfather, who'd built this place to escape the noise of the world, to find peace. I'd fought for that peace, not just against Karen, but against the idea that anyone could dictate what home means. The wildflowers I'd planted swayed in the breeze, their colors soft in the moonlight. I realized then that this fight wasn't just about a cabin, it was about standing up for what's yours, about finding strength in the quiet moments after the storm. Karen moved away a month later. Her house sold to a young family who waved at me when they drove by. The HOA rewrote its rules, focusing on community instead of control. I kept fixing up my cabin, painting it a deep green that blended with the forest, planting more wildflowers until the clearing looked like a painting. Every nail I hammered felt like a promisito my grandfather, to myself, that I'd never let anyone take this place from me. And as I sat on my porch, a cup of coffee in hand, I knew I'd found something Karen never would, a home worth fighting for. Not with anger, but with love.